We're delighted to be hosting this morning's breakfast and with our partner, Wheels Global Foundation. Today we will be discussing reviving the dream, designing technology for social well-being. In the mid-20th century, many believed that emerging technology would eradicate poverty, hunger, sickness, and build a more just, sustainable world. Anything seemed possible, but in intervening decades, technology has taken a sharp turn away from addressing social challenges. Today, that dream is being revived. Across the globe, sustainable technology is being deployed, reimagined to meet basic human needs, address social injustices, and create a more balanced, prosperous society. Wheels Global Foundation, headquartered here in Reston, Virginia, is on the forefront of this important work. What is the opportunity for our community, for all communities, to benefit, and what role does philanthropy play in promoting technology that advances social well-being? So before we get started with the program, I'd like to introduce a few dignitaries and special guests. Is Jennifer Bosco here? I didn't think I saw her. John Faust, Danville District Supervisor, Fairfax County. Karen Colbert Sanders, Fairfax County Public Schools Board Member. I don't think she made it. Any dignitaries that I missed? I know you all dignitaries. Please thank John for joining us, for coming right around the corner, helping us out. This morning, we're going to hear from two keynote speakers. Unfortunately, Brian Komar couldn't be with us due to the weather conditions, the hurricane. He had to leave and get back home. So what we'll do, we're going to have two presentations, and then we'll have a panel discussions with Q&A, and there will be an opportunity for the audience questions. First, I'd like to introduce the President of Wheels Global Foundation, Suresh Sonoy. Wheels Global Foundation provides innovative technology-driven solutions to the challenges that affect the global rural population in 6 areas: water, healthcare, energy, education, livelihood, and sustainability. Their mission is to improve livelihoods for citizens across the globe through implementation of sustainable technologies. Suresh is the Executive Vice President of ALEX Technologies, providing information technology and software development services. Please join me in welcoming Suresh Sonoy and the Wheels Global Foundation for partnering with us today.
Thank you. Thank you, Bernie, for the wonderful introduction. Thank you. And thanks, everyone, for taking your valuable time and being here this morning. I think there is echo. So before I start, we have been spared. We've been spared the wrath of Florence. I hope you'll join me in our prayers and well wishes for those who are in the line of this miserable storm. I'm sorry that Brian couldn't be here today because his family is, I think, right there in the middle of in the Carolinas. But again, thank you for giving me this opportunity, Eileen and Northern Virginia Community Foundation. Let me start off with this diagram which says how consumed we are by technology. This is what happens in a typical minute in 2018. And as you will see, there are 3.7 million searches on Google every minute. There are 18 million text messages as we sit here in the last minute that have gone across the wires in just 1 minute. We are just consumed by technology. Our lives are governed and managed and run by technology. And the problem is that since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, most of the technology that has been developed has only benefited the top half of this pyramid. These are people who are, with incomes above the poverty level, in most of the world, and it varies from country to country, obviously. But something like 80 or 90% of the technology has only benefited the top of the pyramid. But the technology that we are seeing develop today has significant opportunities at the bottom of the pyramid. And that's something like 60% of the world's population. So more than 6 billion people in the world have not been touched by most of the technology that you and I experience every day. However, the good news is that when you look at the technology that is being developed today, the opportunity to serve this 6 billion people is enormous. Things even like robotics and virtual reality that we think are, or even genetics, for example, which we think are going to displace people, can be used very effectively to serve this segment of the population in the world. The interesting thing is I also came across a very new term, if you will, and it's called philanthropreneurs. And I'm going to just talk about just a few points here. And this is the typical modern day entrepreneurial philanthropist. And here are some key words to focus on. Number one, they are looking for impact. It's not just about writing a check as a band-aid, but using money in a manner that you would invest in a new enterprise. But instead of measuring return on investment, they are looking at what is the return on the philanthropic dollar in terms of the impact that it creates. They don't believe in just investing. They don't believe in just donating. They want to invest. So the emphasis is on investing the money in a manner that whatever you undertake to do is both sustainable, it is scalable, it is measurable, and it is not just to do a patchwork and solve an immediate problem, but to eradicate the problem. So if you take the example of the Gates Foundation, which we all have heard about, they are working on eradicating measles in Africa. They are working on eradicating polio. They're not talking about just finding a cure. They're looking at eradicating these kind of illnesses. So what we see is a way in which the modern day philanthropists are not looking at just solving a problem, but eradicating problems, and also looking at philanthropy like an investment. So it was that 2005, some of you were here when we hosted a very large conference in Montgomery County. When I say we, these are the alumni of the Indian Institute of Technology, which is where I went to school along with several of my colleagues who are here today. And the subsequent year, we had a similar conference held in Mumbai. We kind of alternate each year. And during that conference, the then President of India, Abdul Kalam, who was also a nuclear scientist, he said, you guys talk a lot. Why don't you do something? He said, why don't you solve the big problems of the world? Try to sort of serve not only your country by birth, but also the country by adoption. Look for common solutions to common problems. But no one would tell us what those common problems were. So we got together as a group right here in McLean, and we had a brainstorming session, and we had several people involved in it. People like academics and entrepreneurs, and the Indian Institute of Technology. We are about 100,000 people in the US that have now adopted this as our own country. And most of them have gone on to do fairly well in entrepreneurial ventures. So they wanted to do something and give back. So first we had to sort of figure out what are those common problems. And when we looked at the statistics and the data, it was absolutely mind-blowing. Wherever we turned, they said the next wars are going to be fought over water. And in India, for example, in the next 5 to 10 years, the estimate is that 400 million people, that is the population of the United States and then some, will not have access to drinking water. Most of the water will be either polluted or just not potable. Let that sink in a little bit. When I was there earlier in March or so this year, I saw a newspaper report that the big city of Bangalore, which most of you have heard of, was facing evacuation. That's 12 million people having to be relocated because they were afraid that they will not have drinking water in the next 10 to 15 years. That was just a newspaper report. It could be fake news, I don't know. So, but that's what they said. And we hope it's not true. But that in fact is a fear, because we are running out of drinking water. Even in the United States, when you look back and see what happened in California just 12 or 18 months ago when they had the miserable drought. And even in our own backyard in Drainsville, once I remember about 10 years ago, there was some there was an oil leakage, I think, and some of the aquifers were polluted and required some homes that were dependent on that to go and get water from elsewhere. So water is a huge problem. The next is healthcare, and there's been enough said about healthcare here in the United States, both affordable healthcare, and I was looking at some statistics, and even though 20% of all doctors in America, international doctors, are of Indian origin, 700 million people in villages in India do not have access to healthcare. They don't have doctors, they don't have hospitals, they don't have medications or access to medications. So health is a huge issue, and I'll have more examples of how this is being addressed by our organization. Energy, again, renewable energy is a big challenge, and especially in emerging countries like India and most of the countries in Africa, energy is a major challenge. The last village in India to be electrified and get power connections was only about 2 weeks ago. Okay, education. This is again mind-boggling. In India, there are 26 million children who enter the kindergarten stage each year. That is more than the population of Australia and many of the Middle Eastern countries combined. And that's the net new children coming to get educated in schools. In the United States, the problem is just the reverse. Most of the universities have a problem where they have capacity, but undergraduate students are finding it difficult to pursue higher education because they have huge student loans. So the cost of education is very high. And as a result, American universities are increasingly dependent on foreign students coming here to study. And that has all kinds of problems because our intellectual property is going away when these students go back home. And there is a very fine ecosystem between our own defense systems, our own, when I say our own, here in the United States, academia and industry. So therefore, education is a big challenge, even in the United States, on how we manage that. Rural livelihoods. There is an increasing percentage of farmers in India who are committing suicide because they are unable to sustain their vocation and their work because they just don't understand how to manage their crops and the pricing and so on and so forth. So a simple product like coffee beans, for example, which are grown in India, it goes through 8 different channels before it comes to the market. So the middleman makes a lot of money, but the farmer pays the price. And most of them don't have simple warehousing or processing facilities. So as a result, when they harvest, they tend to sell the crop as fast as possible at any price they can get so that there is no spoilage. And despite that, about 65% of India's produce is lost in the supply chain because of poor warehousing and poor supply chain conditions. And to some extent, even in the United States, the small farmers have a big problem, in facing, how they bring products to market. And finally, there is sustainability. Anything we do has to be sustainable, has to be preserved over a long period of time, and we have to find ways in which the work can continue. So that's what WHEEL stands for. And when we started looking at it, and we said each one of these areas lends itself to a technology-based solution that can increase impact. So we adopted the tagline, technology-enabled philanthropy. And just yesterday, some of my colleagues were here from New York, and here locally, we had a terrific meeting at the Paul Nitze Center at Hopkins, and we were talking about how policy and philanthropy go hand in hand sometimes. So for example, right now we have a challenge where it's not easy to send money from here to India because of foreign exchange regulations, because so much money has been, is money laundered, also for, terrorist activities and so on. So the number of rules and regulations governing how money flows from one country to another, even for philanthropic reasons, it goes through a lot of political and regulatory barriers. And that's also true here in the US. Okay, so we said, we should also think about how technology can be adopted. Things like blockchain, for example, can be used very effectively to avoid that kind of, money laundering activities. And so we talked about, starting an initiative on technology-enabled policy. So every one of these 6 areas, and there are many more, such as transportation and so on and so forth, but we thought that these were the 6 that were of major concern to not only India and the United States, but perhaps for the rest of the world. So I'm just going to give you, in the interest of time, a few case studies and see exactly how technology has been used. And I'm going to focus primarily on the work that we are doing here in the United States. And the first one is we work very closely with the Association of Physicians of Indian Origin in America, called API. And they're a very well-heeled group, and they, like us, have also pledged to give a lot of their both money and time to philanthropic causes. And one of them is that we are doing jointly is called the Veterans Obesity Awareness Program. And we are working very closely with the VA, and when I say we, mostly the physicians part, but we are offering them the technology component. So one of the things that we are doing is working on an app that veterans will be able to carry on their cell phones, on their smartphones, and they can find other veterans who want to go for a walk or go jogging with them or participate in some sports activity and create that community, because 80% of veterans who come into the veterans hospitals are obese. They have a problem with obesity. So we said, well, that can be solved by encouraging them and keeping track of their physical activity. So if you create a simple app that they can download for free, then veterans can get together with others and go on a walk, go jogging, and they can keep track of whether or not they're losing weight and they're managing their health problems. So simple application of technology. And this is where I find the first chart very useful. That when we look at it, we say, gee, our lives are consumed by technology, but it can be used in very meaningful ways to serve those who are underprivileged. And this is a very good example of how a simple application can help, for a very good cause. This one happens in India, actually, and we actually did this demo to the VA. One of our colleagues who went to school, his child was severely autistic. So he moved back to India and decided to do research on how Internet of Things can be used to teach autistic children how to interact with a computer. And then he said, this can also be used for paraplegics. So in a country like India, where there are over 1 million soldiers, there is a fairly large number of paraplegics, because these are, and you never hear about it in the news, because these are the 1Z, 2Z soldiers who are patrolling the borders, and suddenly an IED device goes off, their spine is severed, and they become paraplegic. But it's never reported in the press. So this one institute in Pune, which is where our company also has a presence, and I have the opportunity to visit every so often, I took a trip there along with this colleague of mine, and we said, how can we help these paraplegics? And the unfortunate part in India particularly is that a lot of these people become a burden to society in their minds, even though they are young, they are 30, 32-year-old youngsters, and they also have language issues. So they want dignity. They want something that they can do that can make their families want them to come back home. So we said, okay, let's support this particular technology, and it's very simple. So this guy, he took cards with alphabets like both English and in Hindi, with both Braille and an IoT device embedded in that card. So when the paraplegic looks at it or touches it, the computer responds back and says, that's A, or that's A. So they learn how to read, and they also to write by just this IoT device. So, and when we first started this project, we said within 12 months, we want to make sure that at least one person gets a job. And I'm happy to report that I've been going there every time I go to Pune just for an hour or so, meet these folks. And there are any number of volunteers who come and teach them how to operate a computer. Some of them have become experts in graphics, okay, for example. And one of them got a job as a gatekeeper, where they print out badges when you come inside the facility. And I should have taken pictures of their faces when they heard that this person had a job, because there was some promise and hope of not only getting a job, but a good job with technology. So there's another example of how IoT, which we would not think of as something that can help the paraplegics, has been very effectively used in this facility. And when we demonstrated this to some of the folks at VA, they said, we want to do that here. Let's talk about that. So we said, okay, happy to do that. So once it's funded, we'll be happy to bring it in and make it available. Recently, I was talking to another colleague, friend of ours, who's local here, Cheryl Campbell, who started a foundation called the Eagle Warrior Foundation, where she identified how a lot of the wounded, ill, and disabled veterans have to go from point A to point B, and very often they cannot afford, while their costs are generally covered, they cannot afford to take their families along with them. So Cheryl and some of her supporters went ahead and bought some planes. And they also came up with the idea of using frequent flyer points from donors to allow the families of these veterans to accompany them to the point of treatment. So we talked to them and we said, look, there are things that we can do to help also, such as the IoT, technology and the app and so on. So she said, how can you help us? So the first thing we said, let's raise some money, and then we'll identify projects that we can do together that are technology based. So actually in a couple of weeks, on October 9th, we have organized our first golf tournament, which will raise about $25,000 or $40,000. And we said that's a good amount of seed money to bring some of these technologies and examine ways in which we can help this particular cause. There are a whole bunch of other examples, so let me give you a few. Education. So one of the things that we helped develop at the Indian Institute of Technology is something called spoken tutorials. And this is a product which is a combination of a software program and manual inputs, where we can take any material, any education material, and convert it into 40 regional languages, plus a few international languages like Spanish and Portuguese and French. So I'll give you one example where education and healthcare comes together. Last year, we were very fortunate to get a $2.5 million grant from a company called Amlin Pharmaceuticals, the founders of which are two Indian brothers, Chirag and Chintu Patel, were committed to giving back. It's an $8 billion company, privately held, and they wanted us to start a program in India with a pledge for $10 million or $2 million a year over 5 years. And they started out with 2, then they gave us 2.5 in the first year itself. We've started 2 programs. One is for women's health and prenatal and postnatal care, and the other one is for water and sanitation research. And both of these are amazing because we are starting to learn that water, sanitation, and health kind of go hand in hand. And even though we have 1.2 billion people in India, and I said 700 million of them are in villages, rural areas, a lot of the children are malnourished. So the first 1,000 days after delivery are very critical in the mental and physical development of the child. And during that time, it is very important that breastfeeding and any other nutrition it works to what it's meant to do. And the problem is the women just didn't know. So we took about 6 or 10 videos on proper childcare in the first 1,000 days and converted them into these 40 languages. And the IIT's also developed a laptop computer that can be fully loaded with all this software for less than $100. So, there's a gentleman here, Anand, who runs an organization called EduGirls, and we are working with them. Because one of the challenges they have is where even though you might have faculty, when you go from McLean to Great Falls, they speak a different language in India. And that's a big problem. So, working with another organization called Pratham, overnight we raised $100,000 for 1,000 computers because each of these laptops can educate 6 to 8 children. So that's how technology helps to multiply the impact, if you will. And these children are tracked to make sure that they go all the way to not only graduation but also getting jobs. And we are talking very closely with EduGirls, for example, to do something similar. Okay, so there's a situation where we are helping education, women's health, and the proper use of water and so on and so forth. We are working with another group called Sevak, doing something similar. This guy who was actually a surgeon for the US Navy and actually of Indian origin but raised in Guyana, okay? He came to us and he said, I have a plan where I'm going to hire 10,000 retired soldiers because they retire by the time they're 40 or 45. And he said, I'm going to teach them how to deliver basic health care. That is, take blood samples, take the blood pressure and so on and so forth. So we actually created a very simple patient care system, the same computer for $100, the same program to convert it into 40 languages. And now every one of these soldiers, they go through a training program. It costs about $1,200 or $1,500 for the training itself. And once they go, they pay a very small salary to go back to their villages and provide this service. And when they meet someone, they take all the data, and the computers are Wi-Fi enabled, and they can upload all that information to a hospital in one of the major urban areas in Baroda or Ahmedabad. And the doctor prescribes that medication, which they are also trained to administer on a proper basis. Simple technology, and it even becomes more interesting because of the very high heat. By the time a lot of these students, a lot of these medications are transported from the urban center to the villages, they are rendered useless because of the heat. So they wanted something that can refrigerate these medications at about 55 degrees Fahrenheit at a constant rate. So we worked with the IITs in Gandhinagar to come up with a very simple mud utensil which is double walled. It's called Mitti Cool, if you will, and there's water in the walls, and it keeps the temperature of the medication at around 50 degrees, so there is less spoilage. Simple technology, but terrific impact, huge impact. So I think I'm going to stop at that, so my colleague can also speak, and then we'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Suresh. That was amazing insights. Thank you for your hard work. Next, I'd like to introduce David Heyman, co-founder of Smart City Works. Smart City Works is a new class of business accelerator called a business actuator, established to build and launch the next generation of infrastructure companies and improve the livability, operations, and resilience of cities. He is not only nationally recognized thought leader in innovation, but an expert in national security, a former software engineer, and has served senior positions in the private sector and government. Most recently served as Assistant Secretary for Policy, United States Department of Homeland Security. Please join me in welcome David Heyman.
I'm here to talk a little bit about this topic, reviving the dream, designing technology for social well-being. I'm excited about it because that's what I do. And I was delighted to hear that there's a topic that I can speak on of something I do, as opposed to a topic I don't do. Let me start. I'm going to sort of do three themes. One is inspiration, one's innovation, one's impact. Inspiration is sort of why are we doing what we're doing? It's related directly to the topic. As Bernard said, I have about 20, almost 30 years worth of experience working in national security, focusing on the theme of resilience and the intersection of technology and security to build national resilience. And everywhere I've gone, we've taken a look at what are the threats, what are the technological solutions, what are the opportunities. And in this most recent endeavor with Smart City Works, it's how do we actually pull those technologies, those solutions forward to build resilience. And to talk a little bit about this, I want to just sort of set the context. And that's because we're in a critical time where we have an intersection of two forces in society and in the world, two tracks heading in the same direction, or two trains heading in the same direction. Number one, we've got the force of demographics. Every year now, actually every week, you see about 1.5 million people moving into cities. We've got this rapid urbanization going on. That's the size of Philadelphia or Phoenix or San Antonio every week, people moving into the city. And in the next few years, the next couple decades, most of the world will live in cities. That changed in 2010. Up until then, throughout human history, people were rural. They lived in the suburbs, or beyond suburbs, in rural communities. In 2050, 70% of the world will live in cities. And that's got to put a lot of pressure on cities. Weather's the other train running down a track, and they're heading for a collision right now. It's not surprising that every country in the world, Syria, North Korea, except one, United States, signed the Paris Accord agreements to address the extraordinary change in the world right now as a result of human habitation and the construction and activities of human beings. If you look at what's happened over the last 2 decades, just to take a look, we are seeing more and more severe weather events every year at greater and greater expense and cost and destruction to society. In the last 2 decades, we've seen about $2 trillion worth of damage. 600,000 lives have been lost. 4 billion people have been injured or displaced. And we've seen in the last 15 years, 13 out of the 14 warmest years on record in human history. And you can go on and on. There's all sorts of records. In fact, just south of here now is a storm that's going to be coming north, the furthest north if we've ever seen a storm like this in history. Every year there's a new record. And so we have this collision going on between rapid urbanization and weather, and what happens when those two things collide. Tremendous stress on our communities and where we live, on the people, on the ecosystems, and on the infrastructure. We need, when people move into cities, to support them, right? We need to build houses. They need places to live. They need the energy and the resources to construct those houses. To live, they need drinking water, good, healthy drinking water. How do you get from one, you need a job. How do you get from the job to home, back and forth? Transportation. Tremendous amount of infrastructure is going to be required to get that 1.5 million people per week moving into cities. And our infrastructure is under stress, though. Before we need all of that, before we need and support all of that initial infrastructure, we have, at this point, across the globe, failing, degraded, cost-ineffective infrastructure. You look in the United States and you see the American Society of Civil Engineers every year, every couple of years, they update that report about infrastructure in the United States. Basically, we're getting a C minus in most of the country. This region's a little bit better. DC metro region's a little bit better, C plus. But we're seeing Ds and everywhere across the country. And that's because we haven't put the investment in. In the United States alone, $3 trillion of investments is needed over the next 3 years just to keep pace with GDP. Across the globe, it's $57 trillion, right? And that's to get all of the people moving into cities. But we don't want just to build infrastructure, right? We've got this challenge of what it takes to build cities, the resources that are required, and the impact that's having, that's creating storms like Florence, right? So we need to build smarter, more sustainably, more resilient, We need solutions that can endure, that cost less, and that are, in effect, smarter. And we need, in order to do that, we'll need unprecedented innovation in this space. Fortunately, disruption's upon us, right? We're actually at a really interesting time right now with the advances over the last 20 years in material science, cloud, memory storage, data analytics, mobility, telecommunications, across the board. We've been able to miniaturize and intelligentize capabilities that can now be deployed through what's called the Internet of Things. The Internet of Things is basically taking your computational capability, linking it to something that has sensing capability, being able to analyze it and possibly control remotely technologies. So what that means is over the last 40 years, we've moved from tracking data points or tracking blips to sensing things, to now with the analytics and the controls to be able to learn, predict, and control or reason remotely with infrastructure. And you're seeing it across the board, whether it's health and energy and oil and gas, public safety. We're deploying these sensor-based compute capabilities, called the Internet of Things, to have an ability to run and operate things in a more sustainable and resilient fashion. And how are we doing this? Where is this coming from? Well, it turns out the innovation's coming from startups, right? On the left there, those are the number of jobs created. On the blue line at the top, that's the age of the firm, right? So all of that job growth, basically throughout the last 20, 40 years, is startups, okay? So if we're going to innovate our way out of this problem, what do we need? Startups. They help not only with the innovation, but they help on economic development. That's where your jobs are created as well. Unfortunately, we've seen a decline up until very recently, a huge downward trend for a lot of different reasons in this creation and survivability of startups. That's starting to change, but let me just give you a quick dissertation on how to solve the problem and why it's starting to change. Okay, on the left there we've got funding and investment. On the bottom, this is sort of the life cycle of innovation. You go from basic research and applied, which is largely done by the government and universities, sometimes entrepreneurs. On the far right of that equation, you have product development and revenue growth. That's what the private sector is really good at. And somewhere in between, you've got to get from here to there, which is you're developing a business plan, engineering a solution so that you can scale it, and putting it into production. You'll notice those two humps there are the investment. And in between there, we have the challenge, the great challenge, which is that on the left we have a lot of investment in the research side from the government, but the government doesn't do the right side of the equation, which is commercialization. On the right side, we got commercialization in the private sector, but we've seen a huge reduction in investment in research and development. In fact, what the private sector is largely doing, particularly in the built and the infrastructure space, is they're acquiring technology through mergers and acquisitions. So we've got this classic, what's called the valley of death, and that's the gap there. You can't get from here to there, and so companies fail, and we don't have the innovation we need. That's particularly problematic in the infrastructure space. If you look at non-farm labor productivity from the last 50, 60 years, it goes up across the board, except in one category. That's construction on the bottom. 19% dip in productivity because nobody's innovating. We're still building infrastructure the way we did 100 years ago. That's not going to work, right? Well, as I said, we need a $56 trillion global investment in infrastructure, $10 trillion locally. So, summarize the problem. A lot of investment needed. Society needs it, right? City governments, which are responsible for that local solution, right? They've got to deal with their budget constraints. They need to deal with sustainability. They've got the fundamental, when that storm hits, where's it hitting? It's hitting in the municipality, right? So they've got to figure out how to design and operate cities smarter, more resiliently. Corporations are saying, show us how to innovate. Investors are saying, bring us deal flow. We want to make some money off of this. And look what's happening here. This is a classic, this is what that first graphic I showed you, why we don't have startups growing. In the first year, 50% of all startups die after year one. Right? It's just the law of nature. Over 5 years, your survivability is 20% likelihood. So 80% of startups fail within the first 5 years. Now, the innovation that's taken place, the solution is something called an accelerator, right? An accelerator is a business organization that provides some support to startups to help them get funding and some growth. They provide some training, they help them do a business plan, they put them in touch with the people who are investors. That's what a business accelerator does. And that comes out of a history 50 years ago of incubators. You've heard that term. Incubators are co-working spaces where companies work together in the same space. They get a break on their rent and their opportunity to help each other through mutual support is what an incubator is. The last 10 years we've had this thing called accelerators, right? So you're starting to see startups get support. If you go to an accelerator, your opportunity for investment triples, your opportunity for survivability quintuples, okay? That's the data. And these are the kind of programs you see in acceleration, you know, as I said, to help with product development, customer fit, go-to-market strategy, a lot of support. We think you can do better than that, right? What's interesting, if you can give all of that to a company, but what if you actually solved the problem up front, you identified the problem up front and helped solve it before they even got there in terms of where they need to go? That's what we do. This is the innovation of what we call now business actuation. Okay? A business actuator on the front end looks at what the demand signal is. What do the cities really need to solve now? What are the innovation gaps that are desperate to be solved? What are the challenges they face? And where can we give some technical resources to help companies get there on the front end? And on the back end, where can they go to put those technologies to use? Where do they deploy them in test beds and demonstration projects? The hardest thing for a startup is getting that customer, right? But if you have that, if the city or the company is telling you right now, if you got that for me, I want it. Okay, we'll get it for you. You use it first. If we can solve that problem before they even come into our business, we're way ahead of the game. And that's what a business actuator does. We are the world's first business actuator. Smart City Works. We build and launch next generation infrastructure technologies. We're focused on improving the livability, operations, and resilience of cities. Just a quick summary of what we do. We focus on what we call the 3 C's, business core competencies. That's basically the training it's sort of a mini MBA in 3-month program. We do customized actuation. That means all accelerators have sort of training programs, and come, we've got a talk on X, Y, and Z. We do a 2-week intensive gap analysis. We join your team, and we stay with you with a chief mentor throughout your life. That person's with you. We may transition depending upon your needs, but we are one-on-one. We have a one-on-one customized program for every company that comes through to focus on continuous improvement. We've got twice a year programs, spring and fall cohorts. I talked about that. We're going to get back to customized actuation. We have some thought leadership programs. We want to change the way people think about designing, building, and operating cities. And that's really important because you've got to change the way we fund them, the way you design them to begin with. I told you about the success. You're much more successful if you have this kind of a program supporting you. This is some pictures that are really handsome people. More handsome people. We have a terrific, you can't do this, what we do, without a tremendous support. So these folks, some of them you probably recognize and know, they're leaders in their community. They're leaders across all the things you need for a business to succeed, whether it's capital investment, technology, urban environment, municipalities, etc. Some of our ecosystem partners. And I'll just point out a few things so you can see how this breaks out. You need to have the entrepreneurial community there, the innovators to be part of it. You need professional services to have companies, accounting and legal services. How do you actually get into the construction space? Maybe you don't know how to do that. Or, who's your end use customer? Actually, American Society of Civil Engineers, our first partner. They love what we're doing. Terrific partner, we're proud to be partnering with them. Transportation, you need very specific sectors that you are supporting. All of the technology side, the compute, the IoT, the sensors and control, the cloud, venture capital support, the growth of companies, technical support, and ultimately product design, data visualization, and most importantly, cities. That's the Rockefeller Foundation's 100 Resilient Cities. They have a network of 700 plus cities. When we do our demand signal analysis, we do it with them. They've got an annual process of looking at what is it you'd like to have solved right now, right today, and we tap into that. So that's what you need to support Actuation. And let me just spend the last few minutes talking about what impact this type of program is having. To begin with, we've been around for 2 years. We have 17 portfolio companies. This is our first class, second class, and third class. I'll point out a few of the successes in there. They are across the board in technologies, from AR, VR, blockchain, health. Actually, we do everything that Wheel does except education. So we have I'll go back and just point this out. IHT is a sensor bottle that Detroit's interested in Pittsburgh. It's a water bottle, basically a mobile platform detecting impurities, lead in water, right? So you don't need to redo your entire infrastructure. You just walk around, you're safe, and you become a mobile, crowdsourced monitoring for the city. We'd start knowing where the problems are in the city immediately. So we do water. Let's try to get health. Let's see, we got health. Cure right there. Data analytics company, local CEO. Improves patient outcome, reduced costs through data analytics, and has had, since day one, been revenue positive. It's an amazing company. I won't go through all of them, but across the board, opportunities in all the different areas that you want for cities to grow. Here's an example about building smart. If you put all of our companies together in the building smart, let me just walk over there so I can see it. Planet impact, data-driven green design. You can figure out your ROI on the construction of a building 7 years out before you even design it. They've got incredible data processing. They work with all the government data sources and national laboratories to do that. Go Space Technologies, they just came through our cohort. European company, they're now making their North American headquarters here in Virginia. It's a smart parking solution, but it's a technology you deploy. You can deploy it anywhere, curbside, in a parking lot, and instead of having to go to parking meters, they're now able to monetize any piece of pavement, and you can actually park there. You can make reservations, and T-Mobile has made them one of their first IoT partners for their new network that they rolled out this year. So if you want to build smart, here's a campus worth of technologies that you can do. If you want to live better, health, as I said, water, ESI does risk modeling through analytics. Every municipality is trying to figure out when's the flood going to hit us, where's it going to go, how can I deploy my infrastructure, green infrastructure and gray, in a smart way. They do that, and they're doing a phenomenal job. And then the last thing, a case study that I was asked to present on, which is really exciting. I talked about customized actuation. So municipalities, governments, companies can come to us and say, we need this capability. So U.S. Department of Homeland Security spent 2 years identifying and trying to pull forward a capability for first responders. The number one problem first responders have that they identified is clearing a building in a crisis, whether it's a flood, an explosion, a fire. The way they do it today, it's called brute force. Room by room, floor by floor. Clear, clear, clear. Next, clear, clear, clear. Okay, if you're in a 200-room building and you're in room 200, how long is it going to take for them to get to you? Right? It's a real problem. And we first responders do this every day. They're clearing buildings every day. So the Department of Homeland Security spent 2 years trying to get that capability. They spec'd it. They did it the old-fashioned procurement method. Didn't get it. Couldn't get it. So they said to us, we want to try something new. Can you help pull this capability forward? Sure, that's what we do. That's our business model. So you want something that gives intelligence to the building, that helps them, first responders, when they're driving to the site, tell me where to go. Where are the occupants? What's the hazard? That seems pretty straightforward. So we put out a call for innovation just like we do every spring and fall, but we did it just for these guys, for this capability. We had over 100 applicants, from the multinationals like Deloitte and Nokia and Honeywell, to a professor in Australia and some startups, local, everywhere. We selected 5. We selected 5 in May, under contract in May. In July, we had a conference in Chicago with first responders, insurers, and the client, the Department of Homeland Security. And we demonstrated minimal viable products across the board. Never seen that before. So in 10 weeks, we had pulled forward the capability that they had tried 2 years to get. And next month, we will be going to the world's most phenomenal test facility in Texas to demonstrate this and do the clock the times. We're going to have first responders clear a building without the technology, clear it with the technology, and we're going to show you impact. And we did that. This whole program is now from May to October. Now we got to commercialize it, and we're working on that. We'll be doing that over the next year. But phenomenal impact. We can do that in public safety. We can do it in different categories. And that's the impact we can have. We are changing the paradigm, reinventing the way we design, build, and operate cities. Starting 50, 60, 70 years ago with Incubate, Accelerate is what we do in the last 10 years. We're in a business actuator. Thank you for your time. Look forward to your questions.
Why don't we take a few minutes to think about some questions for David and Suresh? And I thought I might kick us off with a question, and then we'll go to the audience. So I just want to point something out first, and that is the role that philanthropy has played in both of these endeavors, right? Which I think sometimes gets hidden. And the light isn't shined on it as brightly as it could be. But Suresh, am I right that the Wheels Global Foundation was all about private philanthropic dollars?
Yes, it is.
Now you may have attracted some government investments in the meantime, but it's about private philanthropy and just the goodwill of your members that has started this entire endeavor. And David, and I could be wrong, but I think I'm right that you and Greg basically started Smart City Works with your own investments. This was private philanthropy.
So we started with our own investment, correct? And that's to get us off the ground. Mm-hmm. The two organizations that provided the ability to start the cohorts were the American Society of Civil Engineers, right? We're a nonprofit. Yeah, we're a nonprofit.
And the American Society of Civil Engineers is in the private sector.
It's also a nonprofit.
A nonprofit, right?
World's largest and oldest engineering firm, global society, and
right.
They basically support innovation. But most importantly, Rockefeller Foundation, right? They were another one, right? They were one of our earliest. They not only provided us a grant,
yes,
to get us going, but the partnership to do the demand signal analysis is critical for us being able to target what's the most important thing that's needed right now.
Right. So my first question is this. Do you agree with me that the lines are just blurring between the government sector, the social sector, and the private sector to address large social issues?
It's kind of interesting that the lines are blurring. Mm-hmm. The difference is that, as David pointed out, the mindset has changed. It is no longer just about investing for profits, but investing for impact.
Right.
And I think that's the key differentiator. Now, where the money comes from is a different, ball of wax entirely. So as you rightly pointed out, in the case of Wheels, it is mostly private donations and philanthropic endeavors that individuals might take and look for a platform where we can bring the technology component to bear. So for example, if somebody came and said, hey, we want to use Wheels to design a smart city, I would probably call David and say, can you help us out? And some of that, actually it's happening in some of the remote parts in India where there is not easy access to energy, or they're talking about how can we most effectively use solar or other renewable energy. And the first place that we would look to is either academia or to institutions like yourselves, where we would come and say, is that something that we can do to sort of expand our services?
Yeah. So,
David, have you given thought to those lines blurring in terms of Smart City Works and your role there?
not so much on the blurring, but on the how do you make this work, right? So, if you're a startup, you're high risk. If you want to make it even more difficult for yourself, you say, I'm interested in social impact. So I'm a startup that's social impact. All of Silicon Valley, the venture community says, well, what's my ROI? And if you want to do it, if you want to get investment and keep yourself alive, you need to have patient capital, which means social impact funds.
Exactly.
And so it's critical, and we're working really hard to try to build that community here, because we have these, the problems we face that I just described require
long-term investment.
Exactly, long-term investment. We have near-term impact. These companies, 80% of my companies have investment and/or customers, versus what I told you, 80% dying within the first 5 years, right? So we're doing something right, but in order to do this, we're going to need patient capital to really step up.
All right. Yes, sir.
I love the question, because I can't stand the term smart cities. I can't stand the term. We have it, it's kind of marketing and brand, because we're so new. What's an actuator? Like it's hard enough to explain that. I don't have to explain what we do by saying we're smart villages or smart whatever. And smart doesn't even matter either. So let me answer the question. The term smart cities doesn't work because there's no such thing. It's too big a term. We need to have smaller units to bite. The elephant has to be eaten in one bite at a time. So I'm interested in smart districts, like a campus, a university, or a developer. If Tyson's Corner is being developed, I want a developer. Those are the chunks which you can actually make a difference. We're working with Fairfax County on that. I see Etta Davis in the back there. Thank you for your terrific support. And they're pioneering some of this by saying, well, here's an example. One of our companies improves the performance of roads so that you never have to replace that road. They've been deployed for 15 years, never had to replace that road in all conditions, and they're made entirely of 100% recycled material. You know how much it costs? We have to replace roads every 5 to 7 years. Billions and billions of dollars are wasted on that. Thanks to Fairfax County, they're now looking at taking their dump, first road. In fact, it's happening this week. I think it's last week or this week. And they're putting in these smart roads. First of its kind. They don't need to do the whole city. And if they just do the dump and that works, maybe we'll do a bigger chunk. But you got to do chunk sizes of things. You got to take a piece that's solvable and show that it works, and then scale. And I believe in that.
Great.
When you start looking at villages, you are actually now starting to reach out to that segment of our society that has not been touched by technology development. And you mentioned infrastructure. In India, again, when you go into a village, there are no toilets. And that is a women's health issue, for example. And the current Prime Minister and the administration has said that they want to build 100 million toilets in India as a part of a philanthropic endeavor, but there is a fee for using it. So now when you go to India and you go to some of these cities, there are projects underway where they have coin-operated toilets in villages. The amount of money they collect is very small, but it's enough to make it a sustainable project. So we are not talking about any sophisticated technology here, but something as simple as having a toilet that both men and women can access without having to, do their thing in the the darkness of the night or whatever. And that is a huge social problem. But if you look at the market, it costs about $200 to $300 per toilet. Now multiply that by 100 million toilets, it's a huge market, billions of dollars. And even if you charge a relatively small amount of money, the profit opportunities are huge. The impact is enormous. So you're absolutely right. If we take the concepts that we have talked about for cities and just started to sort of look at it from the perspective of the masses that do not have access to the kind of infrastructure that cities have, the impact is enormous with the same technology.
Just to add one other thing to that, because I think that's right. And to get to how do you get there? The reason I said district, you just need an administrative unit that can own the life cycle of the project, right? A city can't do it. They've got too many cooks in the kitchen. A developer can do it. A university can do it. A village can do it if they have the council or whatever administrative district that can do it. And the other thing is, in addition to the administrative capability, if you can, somebody talk about policy, you were talking about policy, right? Policy and technology. I spent most of my life in policy. The only way to go the other direction is through policy. And we're looking at regional smartness, right? How can you do that? Only on a policy level can you scale. So you've got to have those two things to do the most impact will be to get at the village level or administrative unit that's controlled, and through policy that allows you to scale.
So here's another challenge. I mentioned that it costs about $250 to $500 to actually implement a toilet. We have actually raised money and implemented about 130 toilets, working together with Habitat for Humanity, Build India project. And the problem is that at $250, that's almost 6 months' salary or income for most villages. So it's a very expensive proposition. So actually we met with the folks from DARPA and we said, if this was a problem in the United States, how would you solve it? Because we have to bring the cost down to maybe $50 a toilet. And the requirements are very unique in India because of the caste system and all that. They want to make sure that it's self-cleaning, for example. Okay? How do you do that? And I think that's where folks like you and others can sort of say, that is a huge market. How do we bring the cost down to $50? And it can only happen through better technology.
That's the innovation in technology that you were talking about, David. Do you really think innovation's going to save us? I mean, is innovation going to really solve most of these issues? Is it going to happen fast enough? I just look at the scale of the problems you're talking about, and I mean, I hope you're right. But am I the only one that had that question?
So a personal philosophy of mine is to look at large problems from the bottom up. I was part of the thought leadership team that changed the way we do national security when Homeland Security was invented. You can't, when you have geostrategic problems like Russia and China, and you have command and control. National security is command and control. It's top down. It's top driven. But Homeland Security has to be bottom driven because things happen at the local level. So having to reinvent national security from a bottom up approach is something that I'm very closely connected to. These same challenges, climate change, cyber threats, pandemics, all have to be solved.
To cities, right?
All of these have to be solved in bottom-up approach. So the answer is yes. You have to de-risk your solutions in a local village or small unit, and then scale. And you scale by crowdsource.
Well, I think innovation is happening in multiple different ways, both at the academics level as well as within industry. It's the application of that innovation that we are talking about. We talked about the $50 toilet. Okay, there is an organization called Vicente Ferrer, organization, which is now just recently established a presence here in Northern Virginia. It's a Spanish, their origins are in Spain, and they are using augmented reality and other technologies to teach farmers how to farm. Okay, so augmented reality was not innovated for that purpose, but it's the application of augmented reality and robotics and even genetics. You know, there's a lot of innovation going on, and it's very, very exciting. But how you apply that technology for commercial purposes, such as the ones that you mentioned, IoT is, you know, all of us have some kind of a automated, you know, IoT device at home, including Alexa or whatever. But how you apply that to philanthropic purposes, for the social impact purposes, you know, there are people who are thinking about that. And that's, I think, where the market is, because there are 6 billion people for whom those technologies are affordable.
Eileen, I'm going to answer your question and say no. I don't think we're going to get there, which is a devastating answer. And the reason we won't get there is because, as you rightly pointed out front, there's lots of, Suresh is right, there's lots of innovation out there. I get more applicants to the Actuator program than we can handle. But getting good ones to live that life, to get into the customer base, to get the investment, to get the roadway, it's not going to happen without changing the investment structure. And we need philanthropic, we need patient capital, we need social impact. The hardest thing I have right now is having the sidecar investments to get these guys far enough downstream to scale. And if we don't do it, if people don't wake up and say, we can't just invest in unicorns and make lots of money, we have to solve tough problems, we won't get there.
Yes, sir. You had a question.
You know, I mentioned 2 technologies that have been used in the education space. One is spoken tutorials, where we take any education material and convert it into regional languages. We demonstrated that technology here at Montgomery College, as well as at community college, as well as in Dallas, and they both wanted to use that to teach new immigrants, reading and writing in English, for example. So technology can be used, and thankfully, today, most people, even in villages, have access to smartphones. Okay, that's one of the 8 million new smartphones are sold each month in India, for example. And a lot of it, you know, is to rural consumers. So the infrastructure, if you will, to deliver that educational content is fast expanding. It's a question of coming up with the right apps to do it. Okay, virtual reality. I talked about augmented reality and virtual reality being used to demonstrate how, you know, better techniques in farming or other activities in rural areas. So the technology exists, and the bandwidth is improving. Okay, satellite-based communication. So you don't really need copper wire going across villages anymore. So the technology exists. Now, as far as the process is concerned, the first thing that you have to do is engage someone like David or Wheels or whoever to sort of figure out, okay, what your process is and how and what technology makes sense to you. If it exists, use it. If it doesn't exist, then we need to raise awareness so we can engage one of the IITs or the MITs or whoever in that, or the George Mason, here in our area, and use them to sort of develop these technologies or adapt existing technologies to solve the problem that you're talking about.
Yeah, I agree with that. I would say that, and I now think of an example where this works. The policy needs to be made eminently clear that and it needs to be communicated to the entire community of entrepreneurs and others. So we did this right in the government. We said, now in order for us to protect ourselves and be resilient as a community, everybody has to be ready. We said 72 on you, right? 72 on you means the first 72 hours in a crisis, you got to take care of yourself. So you got to have your kits, right? You have to have your ready kits, you have to have your plans, and you have to know when you have to use and deploy them. The technology that supports, that's a policy change. 72 is on you is a policy. If everybody knows that, they're all trying to figure out how to do that. Well, the technology solution was apps to provide you a checklist that you could go, that connected to Amazon.com, that sent you the water bottles or whatever you needed, and the communication devices. I hope everybody has their on their wherever you are locally, you get your local warnings so that you know that the storm is coming or whatever. So technology follows the policy if you communicate it appropriately to the community.
Good questions. Whereas Wheels, our organization focuses primarily on the technology aspect, we rely heavily on other charitable organizations that actually have feet on the ground. So, and that's a very important component, the human aspect of it, you know, the delivery of these services. So, for example, I gave the example of SAVAX, the rural healthcare plan, where we are taking soldiers who are retired, you know, veterans, training them how to go into villages and offer basic services. The first thing we do is make sure that they have cell phones, they have smartphones, they have laptop computers, and they know how to use it. So the training process, which I mentioned, costs about $1,500, you know, takes care of that. And believe it or not, even in rural India today, Wi-Fi is readily available. Okay, it's incredible. You know, a story that I have is, you know, one of the unfortunate parts is there are a lot of panhandlers in major cities, and many of them carry smartphones. And when somebody starts giving them money, they send a text message to others, and before you know it, there are 10 other panhandlers because they know this is a source of money. It's amazing. It's amazing. When you go into villages, almost every street vendor now uses their smartphones for payment. You don't take cash. They use Paytm. So the infrastructure exists, okay? It's how we educate them for other purposes besides, you know, financial things, you know, how to plan better, how to get access to healthcare and so on and so forth. So that's one way we do it. And your second question was about security and cybersecurity. That is a challenge. That is definitely a challenge. Happily, you know, we are working in a kind of a marketplace where the economic benefits of hacking are not very high. Hackers go where they can make money. Okay, hackers go where they can get economic value to whatever it is that they're trying to do. So at the bottom of the pyramid, they're totally out of their, you know, what do you call, their sites, if you will, because they know that there is not enough material there to hack. Okay, so far I think we've been lucky that that has not happened in our case. But there are other issues like privacy, for example. How do we make sure that electronic health records of these poor villagers deserve the same kind of privacy and security as we would give to any others in an urban area? So those are issues that we are constantly looking at. And the government, from a policy standpoint, doesn't make one policy for those who can afford it and those who can't. The policies are across the board. So we have to sort of comply with those policies. And that is a challenge because that's not something that is easily funded, but on the other hand, something that we have to make our suppliers cognizant of.
I do. I mean, it's at the sweet spot of what we're doing right now. So we're doing this locally with counties like Fairfax. We're doing it with the federal government. We're also doing it with national governments. We've got 2 governments from abroad that want us to help introduce technologies that they've developed nationally into the U.S. markets. There's lots of ways in which we can be helpful. The most important, though, is if you know what your priorities are. So DHS had a very clear sort of challenge for us. We can run that same program for you. And what this does is there's no procurement other than to help the acceleration or the actuation process. We de-risk that technology solution for you to do procurement downstream if you want, right? So let's assume we do this for a year. The technologies come forward. You do some demonstration in Fairfax County. Then technologies that never existed, that would take forever to spec and procure, become available to you in normal procurement processes, and you've had them de-risked for you and proven, and frankly, you become a beacon for others in the Commonwealth and elsewhere.
I have served in the federal services market for almost 30 years, and federal procurement reform, is something that has always been at the forefront for changes and modifications on how the federal government goes about buying technology, and particularly innovative new technologies. And it's not easy, because in the attempt to make it a level playing field, the rules and regulations governing federal procurement, and I'm sure it's the same in Fairfax County as well, are so onerous and so complex that it's very difficult for someone to step up and say, here's an innovative technology or a solution, but guess what? It's not really been tested. So the risks are higher, obviously. But how do you go about doing it? And that's one of the things that I mentioned in my presentation about there is a crying need for what we call technology-enabled policy. And that is that a lot of people who are very well-meaning and obviously are community service-minded, like Supervisor Faust, for example, who have had the opportunity to serve on his ITPAC committee, which is the Information Technology Policy Advisory Committee. There is an important element that is missing here, and that is the interaction with academia. It is important for federal government procurement officers to sort of understand what's coming down the chain. Where is the research and development going? So if it takes me 18 months or 36 months, or as in the case of India, 10 years before a procurement goes through the federal channels, the technology has changed. It's moving so rapidly. And very often policy is trying to catch up with this time. Let's take genetics, for example. I was talking with someone earlier, I think with Eileen, about a language called CRISPR, which is being developed at Harvard to modify genetic DNA. So you can actually, they were able to embed a picture in the DNA of a mouse, and its, pups, if you will, had the same picture replicated through the DNA. So we are now moving away from silicon as a basis for memory and computing to possibly using genetics and DNA as computing. If you think about it, our DNA has all the memory of all the things that have happened in our whole, our whole lineage, if you will. Okay, so there are terabytes of data that we are storing and carrying around. If you learn how to manipulate that, there are a lot of possibilities for healthcare and everything else. Okay, so think about it for a second. Where is policy on that? Where is ethics on that? Academia is going forward, and before you know it, there'll be a few companies in Silicon Valley or right here in our backyard where they come up with genetics-based medications and solutions, and policy is trying to catch up. Okay, so the important thing is for policymakers to interact with academia and the research organizations and understand how procurement needs to be reformed in a manner that by the time the budgets are approved, by the time the procurement comes up for actually bids, etc., the risks are minimized or fully understood, and you are giving an opportunity for innovation to get a foothold.
Can I just add something to this, because this is actually really important. The procurement problem is such a dog, but cities need to understand that nation states are no longer going to be the unit of competition in the world. Cities are. And so if you don't change, some other city's going to beat you to it, right? We're all competing for resources. We all want high impact companies in our region. We want the jobs. We want to solve our local problems. And let me just tell you from our experience, we've been doing this for 2 years. 71% of the companies that applied and got matriculated in our program come from outside the region. We're local, okay, we work here. They came from outside the region. 2/3 of those ended up relocating to the region to grow and scale in this community, creating high-paying jobs and solutions that are going to be exported to the rest of the world. Now, if that's not an if you want to be competitive in the world, and you care about economic development, you better get in line and change your policies so you can make this happen. Let's get busy.
All right. Listen, this was a fascinating discussion. Thank you, David. Thank you, Suresh.
Thank you.
We really appreciate it.
Great. Good to see you again. How are you?
Thank you all for coming today. The Community Foundation loves to shine a light on ideas that are worth spreading, and this is an idea that's worth spreading. Thank you once again, and have a wonderful day.
If I didn't have second story in my life, I would for sure be homeless. I felt nervous about my abusive dad. So he would get angry out of nowhere. His mood swings were violent, and he would just beat us whenever he felt like he should. My best friend at the time was looking through programs for me because I was basically sobbing to her almost every day, saying I can't afford to live on my own, I can't do this, I don't know how I'm going to survive. And she found Second Story online, and I got into the program. It was such an amazing relief. It was a huge burden that lifted off of my shoulders. When it comes to anything that's a necessity, then Second Story will help me out.
So when we found out I was pregnant, I got kicked out. Well, I originally got kicked out of my mom's house, and then that's when we became homeless. And so that's when we went to a shelter and all that. It was getting closer to my due date, so it was around September. So I called Angel and I was letting her know, like, I don't want to have my baby at the shelter, because like it's like a community shelter, so there's like single guys there, single women there, you know, all together, and I didn't want that for my child. So I let her know like my situation, and then she, next thing I know, was in this program. And once I got in here and I met Dominique and I met Angel, and I could see they're actually willing to help and they really want to help, my whole mindset changed. I've learned ways to be a mom and how to save and how to budget. Like, I never thought about budgeting ever in my life. So while I was in this program, I've saved a lot of money, more than I've ever saved in my life.
Here at the shelter, we have wonderful staff, wonderful counselors here, where we provide the individual counseling. We do group coaching and family counseling sessions. So we kind of provide a goal for them to work on while they're here. The expectation is to reach that goal. So any way that we could help, you know, we try to come from different ends and use different tactics and strategies to help these kids and families, so that they can reach that goal when they complete the program.
The shelter is a place where the teen can come and have a supportive environment, and the parent or guardian can get a little space, and they can have a moment to catch their breath and have a plan for the teen going back home. In some cases, teens are here because they have much more severe situations at home.
Because a lot of these kids, you know, they definitely have traumatic experiences that they go through, whether it's, they've been abused sexually, physically, and parents don't understand why kids act out, you know, in that sense. And so, you know, with the family counseling sessions, you know, we kind of provide tools for them to get the help that the kids need.
To see teens who are working to overcome those life circumstances and get the support to take steps in a direction that helps them build their life is an incredible thing to see in action. And
it's really rewarding because they leave our program, they're excited, they're happy, and then when we do a follow-up, you know, they're working, and it's so wonderful to hear that.
Something I think is special and unique about the Teen Center is the fact that it is a safe environment for us to come and hang out with our friends, do homework, and we get extra help, and there are resources we can use when we don't understand something. We can ask. I am very interested in computer science, so I would want maybe to go work for a federal agency and do computer stuff there. The Teen Center helps me. They investigate other programs to see what programs I would be interested in to help me pursue my dream of computer science.
I dream to be on an island. Puerto Rico, my favorite. Me, my husband, and my daughter in Puerto Rico. Maybe having 2 kids, and then I'd do something in nursing or the medical field.
I hope to find ways to use renewable energy and base all of our transportation and a lot of our modern advances and basically transition them to renewable sources.
Second story is a second chance. It really is. It really is a second chance. It's a new beginning. It's just it's a positive feeling. It's just great. I love it.
In July of 1988, Linda Wimpy knew it was time to put all of her heart and soul into changing the world for her neighbors living with homelessness, poverty, and hunger. What began as Linda and her 3 church families, Church of the Epiphany Episcopal, St. Andrew's Episcopal, and the Church of the Good Shepherd Episcopal, feeding people living in motels like the Breezeway 3 times a week, has grown to a charity that serves close to 3,000 people each year in Fairfax County. With the help of you, our faith community partners, corporate sponsors, and people who believe, as we do, that everyone deserves a place to call home, today we provide programs that touch on every facet of homelessness, poverty, and hunger. Our singles team meets people where they are, in the woods, at our hypothermia prevention centers, or on the street, making connections of the heart that change lives forever, as these resilient people move from homelessness to home. We know that our 4 community centers are helping to break the cycle of poverty for families, all in need of a hand up on their journey to a bright future. Here at Reagan Oaks, adults learn English and job readiness, and children get help with homework, self-esteem, and so much more.
I think Reagan Oaks is important because, if people don't know how to do their homework, they should come here because they can help you a lot.
Here, they can teach them how to read, they can teach them how to write, they can teach them how to be responsible. So, with the community center, for me, I know it has grown both physical and, emotional for them, because they teach them different stuff here.
Miss Stephanie, she made us girls group, and we made a pledge, and it says, I pledge to the leadership that I will never give up and encourage others and do my best, and I'll be a swagging leader.
For folks who have been homeless for a year or more, those with a debilitating physical or mental illness, life can be a battle. Facets is there with permanent supportive housing, so they will be safely, respectfully, and permanently home.
They saved my rear end. I'm blessed. Seriously. If not, I think I'd be out in the woods right now. But with the FACET program, it's nice. And if I need anything, I can go right to them and ask them.
Fairfax County is a place of plenty. Great schools, beautiful neighborhoods, and yet, along the Route 1 corridor are some of the poorest and bravest people you'll ever meet. Our Next Steps Family Shelter, with caring case managers and housing locators, is there for these families, preventing evictions, and when that isn't possible, ensuring families stay together in a furnished apartment as we work with them to overcome past hurdles and learn new skills that will help them become stably housed. As we look back at where Facets began, we thank Linda Wimpy for her courage and her passion. And as we look forward, we thank you for believing in our vision of a Fairfax County where everyone has a place to call home.
And we are praying that all the sponsors will continue to do the best they can to bless these kids so they will be leaders of tomorrow.
Together, we will change the world for our neighbors experiencing homelessness, poverty, and hunger.